USET in North Carolina. I think that's where it was the time I was running. Yes, the Eastern Band. And always happy when tribes come to Washington, D.C. Really want to emphasize that this is Indian land, this is your city, the House belongs to all of us, the U.S. House, the U.S. Senate, the U.S. Capitol belongs to all of us. And so you all are always welcome, and of course my door is open. There's only so many hours in the day, but I'll try to fit as many. Well, I always try to fit as many folks in as I possibly can, and so thank you all so much. I just want to say, first of all, that I know what it's like to put on a big event. I'm an organizer, and I've done that for the last 20 years, and just want to give recognition to all the folks who worked hard to put this event on. I know it's not an easy task, and you have terrific staff and folks who help you. I mean, just organizing the flags, I know it would be would be a hard task, right? So thank you all very much for being here. I'm honored to be here at the 50th anniversary of the United South and Eastern Tribes, and since your establishment in 1969, you've grown to represent 27 tribal nations to give tribes a platform to address critical issues within Indian country and ensure the U.S. upholds its trust responsibility above all. I want to thank you all for the work that USET has done to improve the quality of life for Native Americans through your advocacy on critical issues and tribal leadership development. Today I was asked here to discuss how we can move 21st century tribal-federal relations forward based on diplomacy. I thought this theme was particularly interesting, especially considering the hardships that Native Americans have endured throughout history, and how that hardship has continued to present itself in our communities and culture today. We see people in your communities struggling every day and see the lack of basic necessities like water and adequate health care. It can seem extraordinarily daunting to navigate these issues, to find permanent solutions. And of course, we experience that in New Mexico as well. Some folks don't have water, some don't have electricity, some don't have both. The lack of infrastructure with respect to broadband internet service is not there, and that in and of itself brings a lot of issues and complicates people's ability to move forward. And so those are all things that I care deeply about. How do we remain diplomatic when many of us have been raised to fight our way through life for survival, and how can we learn to be diplomatic when there's a lot of pain and grief connected to Indian country's relationship to the federal government? Diplomacy is defined as the art of dealing with people in a sensitive and effective way. It may seem contradictory to be sensitive to a governmental structure that has not been historically sensitive toward us. However, this concept is a fundamental characteristic of effective leadership, as I'm sure many of you know and understand, and also communication. The philosophy of being sensitive toward others and how that governs our personal relationships is ingrained in our indigenous languages and culture. This fundamental principle is best illustrated by a TED Talk video that is posted on the front page of the USET, entitled America's Native Prisoners of War by Aaron Huey, and that is found on your website. In the video, Aaron shows the social struggles and extreme poverty of the Lakota people on the Pine Ridge Reservation through his photography, which is overlaid with the progression of corrosive federal policy eras to illustrate where the Lakota are today. I draw attention to the America's Native Prisoners of War video here because I would like to expand on the idea of diplomacy that the TED Talk implicitly brings up through the Lakota word Wasichu, which in the video means non-Indian. The video explains that Wasichu can also translate into the one that takes the best meat for themselves, or the word greedy. As we can see in examples like this, our traditions and languages have the blueprint for governing our personal relationships built into them, and this is unique to every tribal nation. If we want to be effective at moving Indigenous issues forward in an Indigenous way, then we already have the answer. As we see, this type of sensitivity toward others and effective diplomacy means not being greedy so others can benefit. These teachings are important to move issues in Indian country forward because Native people are experiencing the same hardships across the United States regardless of geographical location. To build positive relationships to move these issues forward, we must be sensitive toward others inside and outside our communities to gain consensus and build strong leadership based off traditional values. One issue that immediately comes to mind where diplomacy and being sensitive toward others is vital is the fight against missing and murdered Indigenous women. As many of you know, the missing and murdered Indigenous women issue is one that I feel extremely passionate about, but one where diplomacy is needed most to provide resources for those who have lacked representation. Native women have continued to endure generations of systematic violence, who are 10 times more likely to be murdered and 4 times more likely to be sexually assaulted when compared to the national average. In 2016, it was reported that 8 in 10 Native women have survived serious violence during their lifetimes. 50% have suffered sexual violence during their lives. With the upcoming reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act and the House version of Savannah's Act being introduced this month, I have fought for the inclusion of funding for resources for women in urban areas and expanded victim resource programs. Additionally, in working with my colleagues for the introduction of bills that combat violence in Indian country, like the Native Youth and Tribal Officer Protection Act and SURVIVE, diplomacy has been fundamental to move these legislative initiatives forward for all of us. Practicing diplomacy by treating people in a thoughtful way is the only way to move tribal-federal relations forward at this time in history, especially to protect tribal sovereignty during a time when we have an administration that chooses not to protect tribal interests. The most recent example of this was last Congress when tribes and tribal organizations had to fight against this administration for the Medicaid work requirements exemption for American Indians and Alaska Natives. Contrary to U.S. Supreme Court precedent, constitutional provisions, federal statutes, and long-standing treaties, the administration tried to classify Native Americans as a race and not as a political class, contrary to established law. This type of insidious attack on tribal sovereignty is a key example of why diplomacy matters to conduct tribal-federal relations to protect our communities and our rights. We need the help of everyone to shed light on these issues. We cannot do it alone, and building relationships to address these issues and where they originate is vital. Whatever definition that your specific tribe has traditionally interpreted diplomacy to mean or acted upon to develop relationships among one another is what we all must draw from to move forward. All we must do is look to our traditions and languages for teachings on diplomacy to find out how or how not to treat others. As I have learned recently to the Lakota, it means give the good meat to others and don't keep it for yourself. My challenge for you is to determine what does diplomacy mean for your tribe or the nation that you represent. The answer to that question is the best way to move 21st century tribal-federal relations forward based on diplomacy, not only for ourselves now, but for the generations that will take over leadership in the future. One thing I wanted to mention here is with respect to the trust responsibility to Indian tribes. One of the things that we've been fighting for, and I know probably every person in this room knows what a valuable asset Eddie McCollum is to the Appropriations Committee and to tribes with respect to appropriations. And that's one way that we're hoping to move this conversation forward also. The last government shutdown, I know how badly tribes were hurt. We had a hearing on Capitol Hill to make sure that my colleagues and other folks understood exactly how that affected tribes. And so we're hoping to make sure that tribes essentially become exempt from government shutdown so that they can continue to get their drawdowns, they can continue to work in a way that benefits their people. There are so many other issues I know that we all need to work on. My door is open to your ideas, to your concerns, to your stories. We will listen to all of it and above all make sure that we're moving our country forward in the way that it is supposed to move forward, with the U.S. government living up to its trust responsibility to Indian tribes. I thank you all for your continued support. I am here because of Indian country, and I can say that very honestly. I know it's not easy supporting somebody in a primary, especially when they have 5 opponents. Indian country showed up for me, and that's why I'm standing here today, and I'm just very, very grateful, and just know that I am here for all of you. Thank you.